Morning all. Today we're going to do some Fleetmaster maintenance. One of the problems we've got with the Fleetmaster, not the S80, is that the steering alignment isn't quite right. This lorry was cut down from basically a rigid spec with a Home 750 breakdown body on the back. I bought the lorry without the breakdown body. That's on R&S Recovery's Bedford TM. So if you see that vehicle, it's a 4x4 ex-military TM. They actually bought this lorry for that recovery gear and they sold it to me as a chassis cab. So we did a basic setup of the alignment and the truck drives really well. There's a slight pull on it, but it does drive really well and you wouldn't know there was a problem. It's the tyre wear that's concerning me. I've got a slight wearing on the tyres. So what we're going to do, we're going to use the Fiacchi gauges and we'll talk about them as we go along, but we're going to do the basic checks first before we get anywhere near tracking. So the first obvious one is to get the bar under the wheel and check for kingpin and bearing plate. Now to be honest with you, I've done this already with the handbrake on. There's nothing in the kingpin, and with the handbrake off there is nothing in the wheel bearing. The front axle is on axle stands, and that's because we're setting the lock stops. I set the lock stops up when I built the lorry, but things settle in, don't they? You know, it had all new bushes, kingpins were off, axle's been off. It's done about 1,000 miles now, so everything's settled in, everything's had to move about. So let's go through it again. We're going to do the lock stops. I know I haven't got the steering column centred exactly how I want it, or how it should be from the factory. So we're going to get on with that. But yeah, let's have a look at the lock stops first and we'll get that working correctly first. Both stub axles have two lock stops, one for left hand lock, one for right hand lock. They should, when the lock is applied, touch simultaneously. So if we're going forward and we put his lock on full right hand lock to the offside of the vehicle, the rear lock stop on the offside should make contact and the front lock stop on the near side. We're obviously on the near side. So what I intend to do now is to pull the steering over onto full lock. Let's whip that lock stop out, get it all cleaned up and freed off, and then we can start to look at how we adjust the steering and get it right. So here's my lock stop, and that should make contact on this raised portion of the axle, and as you can see there's no paint been touched on that, so that's not been making contact. And I'm pretty sure when we get to the offside rear one we'll find that she's got hardly any paint left on her. So as you can see, it's just a 5/8 bolt really with a big head on it. Let's get the other side out. So as you can see, pretty much as predicted really, that one's further out, it's been making contact. It's been making contact on the axle. So we've clearly got an adjustment problem there. Ooh. Right, well we've been having a bit of a time with this fella. We've been in and out a few times, but he is moving now. I'm just hoping we've still got some thread on him. It's not looking great. Not the end of the world, the inside looks okay, it just wants a tap pushing through it, I think that. So I had a close look at this fella and decided that he's toast, so he's gone. For the time being I've pulled this one out, the S80, and that's nice and free. The only problem is it won't go in the hole smoothly because the threads are pulled, so I'm going to have to bring a tap up for that because I ain't got one with me. This one's the one for the front on the other side, and he's cleaned up lovely, so we're going to fit him next. And that'll still mean we'll be able to set a steering angle up. Interestingly, I've just checked my 4000 and I've checked Clive's 4000, and they only have one stop in the rear of the stub, but David's E10, his ERF, on the front axle, that has one either side, but on the second axle it doesn't seem to be fitted with any, and he's still got the original factory plastic bungs in. Right, let's get this fella fitted. All I've done here is wind this lock nut right back up to the head of the bolt to give us maximum travel in, and that'll give us maximum adjustment. Right, he's all the way back in there now. So now we need to set the steering up. Right, so looking out the cab door, the wheel's straight and we've got the steering wheel sort of straight. It's not quite straight. So I want to set up the offside lock first, for no particular reason other than I've got to set a lock up. So I'm going to pull it over on full lock. So we're right over at that, we're on the lock stops. So I put that piece of tape at about quarter past. I'm now going to knock it off quarter of a turn, and then we're going to adjust the lock stop. So allowing for me free play. Okay, so we're right in the middle. We've done quarter of a turn and we're right in the middle of a free play there with the tape there. So let's go and set up the stops. Right, not ideal this because I can't get the tripod in, but basically all I'm doing here now is winding that bolt out so it touches the axle. As you can see, she's just touching the axle. So this is with this quarter of a turn off on the steering wheel. And she's just snugged up to it there. So I'm going to run my lock nut in. As you can see, she's nice and free, which is why we wanted it freed off before we did this assembly. And that's that locked off. Now in theory I need to do the one at the back of the axle on the offside, but obviously I can't do that because I need to run the tap through. So we'll get crack on, do the other side, do the near side lock, and we can drop the axle back onto the deck and actually start the alignment properly. I'm going to whip the wheel off and the drum to get to that lock stop thread stripped on. Right, with the brake drum out of the way, I can see into the shoes and I can see that this is a blind hole. It must fit in the stub but not go through the brake shoe mounting plate, which is fine. So I'm going to run the tap through with Polly, oh baby, and then we'll I'm going to run the tap through and then fit the bolt, obviously on the opposite lock, because that's the offside lock, not the near side lock. What do you think? Not tea time yet, babe. Right, we've managed to start the tap. Just giving it a bit of oil and just working it to and fro. So it's going in pretty well. We're obviously cutting into some of it. I'd say that's bottomed out at that. So we're about 1 inch, 25mm of tap exposed, and we're bottomed out, so we'll wind it out. While we're winding it out, it's a good time to say my mate Richard told me not to spend a lot of time on these back plates because nobody'd ever see them. Good job we kept them tidy, isn't it? That's a 45mm tap, I reckon, with about 20mm, 3/4 of an inch in there, tapped out. Going quite nice with that. Right, that feels like it's about bottomed out. I'm going to go and put it on the opposite lock. We should touch the end stop on that side and then be able to adjust this one up. Right, I've just checked the other side, and that's just making contact. Right, straighten the steering. So I've got that in place now, all nice and neat and tight, and the job's really finished off well. So just build it up now. That's all they need. Right, built air up, adjust the brake. Perfect. Will do. Right, wheel on. Right, we've refitted the lock stops and they're both locked into the back of the stubs now. So in theory, steering should centralise. So if we look at sending it through its full range of travel, I need to count off how many turns. I've loaded the free play, as you can see here, and then we're going to work his way through and count them. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. So that means we've obviously got 2 turns to get us central. Right, there's a few telltale signs that this column adjustment isn't right. The first one being this grease nipple. If we zoom out a little bit, you can see that it's pointing towards the front of the bulkhead. That shouldn't be there. When we built the lorry, it was about there, because that's where they should be, so that you can access the grease nipple to grease this sliding shaft. Now there's a centre dot on the steering wheel where the nut goes on the threaded section of the steering column, and that will now be lined up straight ahead, so we'll have a quick look at that. That's the centre dot, and as you can see, it's about forward of the vehicle. Right, here's a steering column coming down to this UJ onto the steering box. We've pulled out both of the studs, or both the nuts and bolts that hold this UJ in place, because you can see here the joints there and that joint's there, and that's wrong. That joint should be facing straight forward. I don't know, there's no master spline on these, and I don't know whether they're marked, but we'll have a look now. Right, we've cleaned up the top of the steering box, she's in fine fettle. I'm going to assume this isn't a ZF box, because I can't find the manufacturer's marks on it. The only things I can find are these 4 crosshairs on the top of this sector shaft, top of this column shaft. So if we sort of get into it here, what I've managed to do is, by straightening the wheels up and counting and centralising the boxes, get the 4 marks so that we've got fore and aft, side to side. And I think that's as close as we can hope for any sort of marking on this. So we're going to refit the column UJ. We're going to leave this instalment here for now. Had a bit of a Krypton factor challenge with that steering column in the end. Couldn't get the dot, the grease nipple on the sliding column and the grease nipple on the steering box to line up because of the master spline at the bottom of the steering column. Anyway, in the end I worked it out, and what had happened was the collapsible column, somebody had that in bits at pieces, or it wasn't the right one for the truck, whatever, and I've had to strip it, reclock it and refit it. Next week, hopefully next week, we'll get on to the actual tracking, because that's all complete and I've got that filmed. I just need to edit it. I just wanted to get across that, you know, everything has got to be right. It's a bit like painting. You do your prep and then you do your actual tracking. So making sure the lock stops are right and your steering column central, your wheel bearings are right, are all things to check and make sure are right before you actually start the tracking. And as I say, we'll do that next week.